Right now, an average Russian recruit sent to the front lines in Ukraine survives for roughly 20 minutes once they enter the actual combat zone.
Yeah, 20 minutes.
20 minutes. I mean, that is less time than it takes to commute to work in the morning. And yet the man who sent those recruits into that meat grinder, Vladimir Putin, he projects this image of absolute unshakable power on the global stage.
He really does.
Welcome to our deep dive. I want you, the listener, to hold on to that 20-minute statistic today because it's the key to unlocking this massive illusion we all seem to have bought into.
It is a staggering number, and I think it completely shatters the illusion of the omnipotent, hyper-efficient autocracy that we are constantly sold.
Exactly, and we're sitting here right on the exact week of the 250th anniversary of the United States, July 4th, 2026.
Right.
A nation famously born out of a rebellion against a perceived tyrant, King George III. But you look around the globe today, and it feels like we're living squarely in the global age of the strongman.
It really does. It feels like the tyrants are winning everywhere you look.
It totally does. But today, we're unpacking a highly counterintuitive and, frankly, completely fascinating theory put forward by the writer Noah Smith, along with a really deep stack of historical and theological analysis we've got in our sources.
Yeah, Smith is asking a brilliant question here. He's asking, what if the era's biggest tyrants are actually starting to lose?
Right.
Like, what if the slow, frustrating, bureaucratic democracies of the world are actually much stronger than these loud, aggressive autocracies?
It's such a provocative thesis because, I mean, especially when you consider how dominant the narrative of the strongman has been over the last decade.
Oh, absolutely. We've been conditioned to view democracies as fragile and autocracies as just, inevitable. But Smith and the historical analysts we're looking at today, they argue that we have the entire dynamic backwards.
I want to set the table with an analogy before we get into the actual forensic breakdown of how a leader radicalizes into a dictator.
Okay, let's hear it.
So we tend to view autocracies like a reinforced concrete bunker, right? Like impenetrable, monolithic, zero cracks.
Right, very rigid.
Exactly. And we view democracies like a messy, chattering group project where everyone is arguing over who forgot the glue.
That is a very accurate description of democracy, yeah.
But what if the bunker is actually incredibly brittle? What if the group project is made of shock-absorbing rubber? I mean, if a massive earthquake hits, I want to know which one actually survives the shaking,
That framework is perfect for this deep dive. Because before we can evaluate if the bunker is cracking, we have to understand what the bunker is actually made of. We have to define our terms.
Right, like the word tyrant itself.
Exactly. Because the word tyrant is used so casually today, it's almost a reflex for any politician we happen to dislike.
Yeah, I struggle with that word, honestly. Because isn't tyrant just a political slur at this point?
It often feels that way.
Like when someone uses it today, it's never an objective observation. It's a weaponized label. So how do we objectively measure when a leader actually crosses the line from being an ambitious, aggressive politician to being a literal tyrant?
To find that objective measurement, the sources trace the etymology all the way back to ancient Greece. The original word is tyrannos.
Tyrannos.
Right. And originally, it didn't necessarily mean a bloodthirsty monster. It actually meant a usurper.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it describes someone who seizes the throne or takes power illegitimately.
Mm-hmm.
A classic example would be the 30 tyrants who took power in Athens around 400 BC.
Okay, so the core definitional element wasn't their cruelty, though I assume they were cruel.
They definitely were, yeah.
But the main thing was the fact that the power was not legally theirs to take in the first place.
Exactly. So in the Greek context, it was almost purely an HR issue.
An HR issue, right. It was about how you got the job rather than how you acted once you were sitting at the desk.
That was the starting point. But the definition evolved significantly as we move forward to the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire around the 1st century BC. So think the era of Julius Caesar.
Right, the Ides of March and all that.
Exactly. The definition expands because the Romans were obsessed with law and civic boundaries. So it starts to encompass not just the illegitimate seizure of power, but the actual behavior of the ruler.
Got it. So it becomes about what they do with the power.
Yes, it becomes associated with cruelty, the blatant violation of ancient privileges, the breaking of established laws, and just excessive out-of-bounds behavior.
So the Romans basically defined it as breaking the guardrails.
Ultimately, yes. It's about a ruler going beyond their legal mandate and treating the state as their personal property. And this definition echoes all the way through European history. I mean, The Dutch even sing about it in their national anthem, the Wilhelmus.
Wait, really? I didn't know that. What are they singing about?
Well, in the sixth stanza, which admittedly isn't sung as often as the first, the lyrics specifically talk about driving out the tyrant. They were referring to King Philip II of Spain.
Okay, but King Philip was their lawful sovereign, right?
He was. So he wasn't a usurper in the Greek sense. But the Dutch felt he had crossed the line into Roman-style tyranny by violating their established rights.
Right, doing things he wasn't legally allowed to do.
Exactly. Raising illegal taxes and overstepping his bounds to crush their religious freedoms.
So modern tyranny is a combination of illegitimate power and unbounded cruelty. I want to apply this historical lens to modern politics because this is where the diagnostic waters get incredibly muddy for a lot of people.
They really do.
I mean, critics of both Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump throw the word tyrant around constantly. So if we applied this classical definition from the sources, how do we categorize them structurally? Just strictly looking at the architecture of it.
This is where the structural analysis in the source material becomes vital. So let's look at the American political architecture regarding Donald Trump. Formally speaking, Trump was legally elected in 2016. He came to power through established constitutional mechanisms. Furthermore, while he frequently tests the boundaries of his office and, expresses admiration for strongmen,
Right, which he definitely does.
he still operates within a legal framework. When the Supreme Court rules against him, or when the electoral system finalizes a result, the structural bounds hold.
So purely formally, he does not fit the classical definition of a tyrant.
Exactly. Even though his critics point out his rhetoric aggressively pushes against those democratic norms, formally, he isn't a classical tyrant.
He tests the elasticity of the system, but the system's architecture remains in place.
That's a great way to put it. Now compare that structural reality to Vladimir Putin.
Right. Totally different story.
Completely different. Putin has clearly crossed that line into classical tyranny. He has fundamentally altered the Russian constitution to keep himself in power indefinitely.
Which entirely bypasses his original legal mandate.
Yes. That fits the Greek definition of a usurper perfectly. And then his behavior, the systemic repression, the assassination of political rivals, the invasion of sovereign nations, that fits the Roman definition of unbounded cruelty.
It's fascinating how our cultural relationship to power has shifted, too. I remember reading in the analysis about Shakespeare's Julius Caesar.
Oh yeah, the word ambitious.
Yes. When the conspirators call Caesar ambitious, it was a lethal insult. It literally meant he wanted to break the guardrails and rule over free citizens as a tyrant.
Right, that label got him stabbed on the Senate floor.
And today, ambitious is a required buzzword on a LinkedIn profile.
It really is.
I mean, if you aren't ambitious today, you don't even get the job in middle management.
We celebrate the desire for power and upward mobility in a way the Romans would have just found terrifying.
But, if tyranny is a line that a leader crosses, if it's a process of dismantling those guardrails, how does a leader actually get there? Because people aren't born tyrants as babies. There's no genetic marker for dictatorial behavior.
No, there isn't. To understand the mechanics of that transformation, we have to look at it as a step-by-step radicalization process. It is rarely an overnight coup.
And the historical analysis uses Putin as this ultimate forensic case study to track the evolution.
They do. They break his time in power down into distinct, measurable phases of radicalization.
I really want to walk through this timeline because we look at Putin today and just assume he was always this isolated, aggressive autocrat hiding at the end of a ridiculously long table.
Right, the cartoon villain image.
Exactly. So take us back to phase one. How did this actually start?
We have to go back to 2001. Just 2 weeks after the 9/11 attacks in the United States, Putin traveled to Germany and gave a speech to the Bundestag, the German parliament.
The Bundestag, wow.
And he delivered this speech in flawless German, owing to his past as a KGB officer stationed in Dresden.
It is genuinely hard to picture Putin standing in front of a Western parliament, speaking their language, and receiving applause.
It feels like an alternate reality now. But in that speech, he presented Russia as a friendly, integrated European nation. He offered his full support to America in the fight against global terrorism.
Wow.
Analysts point out that at this time, Putin was presenting himself in the tradition of a 19th century European monarch. He wanted to be a modern Tsar Alexander I.
Okay, what does that mean practically? Like, how does a 19th century monarch operate in the 21st century?
Well, it means he wanted to play great power politics.
Yeah.
He envisioned a new concert of Europe.
The concert of Europe. Remind me what that is.
In the 1800s, the concert of Europe was a system where a handful of large, powerful empires essentially sat around a table with a map and decided the fate of the world.
Oh, right. Drawing lines through Africa and Asia.
Exactly. And they decided the borders of smaller European states, too. In that mindset, things like the self-determination of small countries, minority rights, civil liberties, they simply do not matter.
The big powers just divide the map to maintain their own balance.
Right. And Putin wanted a seat at that big table. He wanted Washington, London, Berlin, and Moscow to basically carve up the spheres of influence.
But he didn't really have the chips to play at that table, did he? I mean, the math wasn't in his favor.
That was his central tragedy.
Yeah.
Russia was geographically immense, obviously, and possessed nuclear weapons, but the Soviet Union had been completely stripped down.
Right.
Around the year 2000, Russia's economy was roughly the size of the Benelux countries, so Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg combined.
That is wild to think about. You cannot demand a sphere of influence over all of Eastern Europe when your economic output is on par with Amsterdam and Brussels.
You really can't.
So he tries to play the great power game, he tries to be the friendly monarch, and it just doesn't work. What shifts his mindset? Because we move to phase 2 next.
The turning point arrives in 2003 and 2004. We see two massive geopolitical events right on Russia's doorstep: the Rose Revolution in Georgia and the Orange Revolution in Ukraine.
Right, the color revolutions.
Exactly. In both instances, hundreds of thousands of young people took to the streets demanding democracy, transparency, and the rule of law. They wanted to pull away from the corrupt, Moscow-centric orbit and integrate with the West.
Now, the common narrative in the West, or at least what you hear a lot, is that Putin was terrified of NATO expanding eastward, that, NATO tanks on his border were his ultimate red line.
And the foreign policy analysts in our sources make a crucial correction here. They say that narrative is a massive misconception that Putin has successfully seeded into Western media.
Oh, interesting. So it wasn't about NATO.
Not primarily. The countries in Eastern Europe weren't being aggressively swallowed by a predatory NATO. They were actively, desperately running away from Moscow because they knew exactly what Russian domination looked like.
That makes a lot of sense.
And Putin's primary fear wasn't NATO encroachment. His primary fear was democratic contagion.
Democratic contagion, just the idea of freedom spreading like a literal virus.
Exactly. If he is surrounded by thriving, transparent democratic states, he is terrified that the youth in Moscow and St. Petersburg will look across the border and say, hey, they have a say in their government, they have economic mobility, we want that too.
And you have to remember, during those years, Russia actually had a very lively political opposition.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
There were independent oligarchs, various political factions, and prominent, fearless journalists like Anna Politkovskaya, who, of course, was later assassinated.
Let me try an analogy here to make sure I'm grasping this. It's like a corrupt corporate boss who realizes his employees are whispering about unionizing because the factory right next door just successfully formed a union and got higher wages.
That's a great comparison.
But instead of offering his own workers better benefits or listening to their complaints, he hires thugs to burn down the factory next door and then tells his own workers that the other building was full of Satan worshippers anyway.
That is a brutally accurate translation of his geopolitical strategy. He could not risk the idea of democratic reform taking root in Russia and threatening his monopoly on power.
Wow.
And the tragic part is, he had numerous off-ramps during this period. He could have compromised, struck better trade deals, and accepted that the 19th century rules of imperial spheres just no longer applied. Instead, he chose to burn down the factory next door.
Which rapidly accelerates the radicalization, because then we move to 2011 and 2012, which the analysis marks as the total psychological pivot.
Yes, this is the absolute boiling point for him. Mass protests break out in Moscow, often called the Snow Revolution or the Bolotnaya Square protests.
Right.
Tens of thousands of urban, middle-class Russians are marching against corruption and rigged parliamentary elections. And this is happening at the exact same time as the Arab Spring sweeps across the Middle East.
The timing of those two events colliding in his mind must have been explosive.
It was. Putin watches the Arab Spring unfold on television. But specifically, he obsessively watches the gruesome footage of Muammar Gaddafi being dragged out of a drainage pipe and lynched by an angry mob in Libya.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize he was obsessing over that footage.
For Putin, this is his worst nightmare materialized. He is absolutely terrified of the mob, the plebes, the pitchforks. In Russian history, this fear is deeply rooted. They call it the Vremya Smoetnia, or the time of troubles.
The time of troubles.
Yeah, it's a historical period of chaotic, deadly civil war and famine. So he looks at the protests in his own capital, he looks at Gaddafi bleeding on the hood of a truck, and he decides he needs a completely new script.
So the friendly European monarch act is completely dead.
Dead and buried. He completely abandons the Western facade and pivots hard to the East. He adopts this Byzantine ideal of Moscow as the Third Rome.
The Third Rome. What's the historical theory behind that?
The theory goes that when Rome fell, the center of Christianity moved to Constantinople. When Constantinople fell to the Ottomans in 1453, the torch of true, uncorrupted Christianity was passed to Moscow.
Okay, so it's a very grand religious framing.
Very much so. It is an ideology where the state is superior to the church, and the ruler is seen as a divine protector of the faith.
And the theological analysis introduces a very specific, kind of obscure term for this role he takes on, the katechon. What exactly is the katechon?
It is a concept from early Christian theology, specifically from the letters of the Apostle Paul, and it translates to the restrainer.
The restrainer.
The idea is that there is a cosmic force or entity holding back the Antichrist, holding back the ultimate evil and chaos from completely consuming the world.
Oh, man. So Putin begins to view himself and actively present himself through state media, not just as a president or a prime minister, but as a literal cosmic savior.
Exactly. He is the katechon. He is the only thing standing between traditional, holy Russia and the decadent, liberal, evil forces of the West.
That is a massive psychological leap. I mean, he goes from wanting to negotiate tariffs at a European table to believing he's literally holding back the apocalypse. How does that change his actual day-to-day policy?
It changes everything, because you cannot negotiate with cosmic evil.
Right. You don't sign trade deals with the devil.
Exactly. This is when the offensive operations rapidly escalate. It's when he sets up the Internet Research Agency, the infamous troll farms in St. Petersburg.
Oh, right. The troll farm.
He starts using 21st century cyber tools to run ideological warfare, trying to influence elections in the US and Europe, flooding the Internet with disinformation. He is fighting a holy war in his own mind, and every dirty tactic is completely justified because the stakes are existential.
This shift in 2011, this pivot to becoming the cosmic restrainer of chaos, it reveals something much darker about modern strongmen in general, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does.
And this brings us to one of the most compelling sociological ideas in the research we looked at, the chaos paradox. Because the paradox is that these leaders claim to be the only ones who can fix the chaos, but structurally, they actually require the chaos to survive.
Yes. The journalist and historian Anne Applebaum unpacks this beautifully in her work on the twilight of democracy. She attempts to answer this agonizing question. Why do rational, well-educated people choose to follow leaders who actively undermine democratic institutions?
Right. Like, how does the authoritarian seduction actually work on a normal citizen?
She breaks this down into a step-by-step psychological playbook. Step one is the trigger event.
Okay, what's the trigger?
A real crisis occurs. It could be a severe financial meltdown, a housing crisis, a sudden demographic shift, or, a global pandemic.
Yeah.
There is a legitimate, tangible problem causing deep anxiety in the society.
The pain people feel is completely real.
Very real. But step two is where the manipulation begins. Step two is inflation.
Inflation of the problem, you mean?
Exactly. The aspiring strongman steps up and inflates this tangible, solvable problem into an existential crisis of cosmic proportions. It is no longer just a complex policy issue regarding border security or interest rates.
Suddenly, our entire way of life is being destroyed.
Right. We're being replaced. There is a malevolent, shadowy elite actively trying to ruin your family. They hype the drama into hyperbole.
It's like they take a kitchen fire and convince you the entire neighborhood is burning down and the fire department is in on it.
Which leads seamlessly to step three. The leader presents themselves as the sole savior. I alone can fix it. They position themselves as the strong, unapologetic, masculine force that will smash the corrupt system and protect the victims of this chaos.
And then comes step four, which is the actual trap of the paradox, right?
Yes. Once this leader achieves power, they must never, under any circumstances, actually solve the underlying chaos.
Because if the chaos ends, if peace and prosperity and boring stability return, their entire justification for holding absolute power vanishes.
Exactly. They make themselves obsolete. Therefore, they must constantly generate new chaos, invent new enemies, and manufacture perpetual crises.
I have to push back on this a little bit, though. If a leader's entire political brand is, I will fix the problem, don't the voters eventually wake up and realize the problem isn't getting fixed? How does the leader sustain this illusion without the public realizing they're being conned?
They sustain it through a concept called muscle velocity.
Muscle velocity, what is that?
It is the speed of a bullet leaving a barrel.
Hmm.
You have to keep the momentum going so fast that gravity doesn't have time to pull the bullet down.
Oh, I see.
In political terms, this is the strategy of flooding the zone with noise.
Mm-hmm.
The modern autocrat uses social media and state television to create a 247 hyper-reality of panic. They move fast, break established norms, tweet incendiary things at 3 a.m., fire cabinet members randomly, start sudden trade wars.
It's like a shark that has to keep swimming forward so it doesn't drown.
By keeping the public in a state of perpetual outrage and cognitive exhaustion, they prevent any critical deliberation. There is literally no time for a parliamentary committee or an investigative journalist to slowly uncover the facts of Monday's scandal, because there are 3 brand-new manufactured crises by Wednesday.
Right. They short-circuit our ability to hold them accountable by keeping our nervous systems permanently overloaded.
And there is a biological evolutionary psychology angle to this that the research brings up, which is fascinating. It's called terror management theory.
Terror management theory. That sounds intense.
It is crucial for understanding the emotional appeal of the strongman. Terror management theory suggests that when human beings are confronted with a severe existential threat, when they are reminded of their own mortality or the potential collapse of their tribe, their psychological needs shift dramatically.
They go into pure survival mode. The rational brain just shuts down.
Exactly. In survival mode, people abandon what cognitive linguists call the nurturing parent model of society.
Okay, the nurturing parent model. What does that look like?
The nurturing parent model is your standard, healthy democracy. Everyone sits around the table, we discuss what we're going to have for dinner, we compromise, we listen to minority opinions. It's healthy, but it's slow.
Right, because when you think the house is on fire, you don't want to convene a family meeting to discuss evacuation protocols.
Precisely. When the house is on fire, you revert to the strict father model. You want someone to smash their fist on the table, cut through all the bureaucratic complexity, and forcefully protect the tribe against outsiders.
And in that moment, you stop caring about their character flaws, their corruption, or their lies.
You don't care at all. You just want to know they are strong enough to fight for you. Autocrats deliberately trigger this survival instinct so that the public willingly, eagerly, even hands over their civil liberties in exchange for perceived safety.
So the chaos isn't a byproduct of their incompetence. The chaos is the core product.
It is the product.
And the ultimate way to inflate a crisis, to ensure the public stays in that terrified, strict father mindset, is to make the threat literally biblical. How does a leader escalate beyond earthly politics? They have to make the threat cosmic.
This is where the political merges seamlessly with the spiritual. It is the ultimate escalation of the chaos paradox. Strongmen eventually realize that terrestrial politics arguments about taxes and healthcare aren't enough to sustain absolute loyalty.
Right. Nobody's going to die for a tax cut.
Exactly. So they place themselves on an eschatological timeline.
Eschatological. Let's define that for anyone who didn't go to seminary.
Eschatology is the theological study of the end times, the final destiny of the soul and humankind.
Okay.
By placing themselves on an eschatological timeline, these leaders completely abandon the mundane reality of policy and budgets. They reframe their political struggle as a high-stakes, apocalyptic cosmic battle between absolute good and absolute evil.
So you are no longer just a citizen casting a ballot. You are a warrior of light fighting the demonic forces of darkness.
Yes. And we see Putin doing this explicitly to justify the invasion of Ukraine. The theological breakdown noted that he is literally quoting Jesus to rally his troops.
I remember reading that. In a massive, highly choreographed stadium rally early in the war, he quoted the Gospel of John, chapter 15. "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends."
It's chilling. He took a sacred text about spiritual self-sacrifice and weaponized it into a militaristic demand for his citizens' blood.
He is wrapping his imperial territorial ambitions in the cloak of the ultimate savior, and he's taking the concept of evil very literally within the Russian legal code now, isn't he?
He is. Satanism is now an official criminal category in Russian law.
Wow. Literal Satanism.
Yes. It allows the state to categorize any political opposition, any foreign journalist, or any human rights organization, not just as a dissenting voice, but as an agent of literal cosmic evil.
Because when your opponent is Satan, infinite repression is not just allowed, it is a moral requirement. The theologian in our research pointed out an incredibly dark irony regarding apocalyptic literature, like the Book of Revelation, being used this way.
It is a profound historical inversion. Apocalyptic literature, historically, was what scholars call conventicle literature.
Conventicle literature.
Right. It was written by and for small, localized groups of heavily oppressed people at the very bottom of the social hierarchy. It was meant to offer secret comfort to people who were suffering under the terrifying rule of actual tyrants.
Like the early Christians suffering under the Roman Emperor Nero.
Exactly. The core message was, hold on, endure the suffering, because God is ultimately in control and the tyrant will eventually face divine justice.
So it was basically a survival manual for the underdog. It was meant to give hope to people who had absolutely zero political power.
But now the tyrants themselves are co-opting this literature. The men who control the armies, the secret police, and the nuclear launch codes are adopting the language of the oppressed to justify their own campaign of terror.
It's like stealing the playbook of the underdog rebel alliance and reading it from the command deck of the Death Star. It's completely absurd.
It really is.
How do people not see through the hypocrisy? Like, how do you have a billionaire or a man sitting on a literal golden throne in the Kremlin, claiming with a straight face to be an oppressed martyr?
It connects back to the strategy of manufactured victimhood. Autocrats and populists constantly adopt a posture of deep resentment. They claim that they, and by extension their loyal followers, are constantly under siege by a malevolent, powerful, global elite.
Oh, I see. So by painting themselves as the ultimate victim, it creates this psychological permission structure.
Exactly. The logic dictates, because we are so unfairly persecuted, because the threat is so absolute, any extreme action we take to defend ourselves is entirely justified.
Look what they made me do. It's classic abuser logic applied to a nation state.
That's exactly what it is.
But if religion and eschatology are the weapons used to build tyranny, the history we looked at shows that religion was also used to forge the ultimate shield against it.
This is a fascinating historical pivot in the source material.
Because while we see autocrats abusing religious language today, the foundational texts of modern democratic republics were heavily influenced by a specific theological movement designed to stop them.
Right. Because as we mentioned at the top of the show, we are celebrating the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Declaration of Independence, 1776.
A document explicitly rejecting a tyrant.
But the historians point out an even older document, the Dutch Plakkaat van Verlating from 1581, which did the exact same thing against the King of Spain.
And both of these revolutions are deeply rooted in 16th century Calvinism, which I found so surprising.
A major, frequently overlooked source of democratic thought is found in 16th century resistance literature. Texts like the Vindice contra Tyrannos, which translates to Defenses Against Tyrants.
Okay, who wrote that?
It was published anonymously in 1579 under the pseudonym Junius Brutus, and it drew heavily on the ideas of the Protestant reformer John Calvin, specifically the final 1559 edition of his Institutes of the Christian Religion.
I'm genuinely surprised by this, because culturally, at least today, we associate Calvinism with strict rules, wearing black and dour, joyless communities.
Right, the fun police.
Exactly. We don't usually think of Calvinism as the punk rock, anti-authoritarian foundation of the modern democratic state. So what was Calvin actually saying about the nature of rulers?
Calvin had a very dim, highly realistic view of human nature, especially regarding those who hold power. He warned that rulers are naturally arrogant, blinded by privilege, entirely prone to violence, and fundamentally corruptible.
Wow, he did not pull his punches.
Not at all. Because of this intrinsic human flaw, he argued that no single human being can ever be trusted with absolute authority. The temptation to abuse it is simply too great for human nature to withstand.
So if you can't trust a king, what was his architectural solution for society? Like, how do you actually structure a government based on that?
He advocated for a proto-democratic dispersion of power. He believed in what we now recognize as checks and balances.
Oh.
He argued that the best form of government is a mixed constitution, where power is divided among different bodies, like a Senate, a lower assembly of commoners, and an executive so they can keep each other in check and prevent any one faction from dominating.
The 16th century thinkers used a really dramatic, violent biblical precedent to justify this legal theory too. The story of Queen Athaliah. Walk us through how they used this story.
The story is found in the Book of Kings. Queen Athaliah was an illegitimate usurper who seized the throne of Judah. To secure her power, she ordered the murder of the entire royal family.
It's a brutal, bloody narrative.
Very much so. But one infant, the heir Joash, was hidden away by the priests in the temple. Years later, when Joash was a young boy, the priests led an armed uprising, overthrew Athaliah, and executed her.
So how did political philosophers in the 1500s use an ancient assassination to justify democratic rebellion? That seems like a stretch.
Well, they use it as a legal and theological test case. They argued that because Athaliah was a usurper and acted with extreme cruelty, which are the classical Greek and Roman definitions of a tyrant, the lesser magistrates, the priests in this case, had a divine and legal duty to overthrow her.
A duty to overthrow her. That is intellectually revolutionary.
It really was. It argued that citizens and lower government officials have an active duty to remove a ruler who exceeds their legal bounds, especially a ruler who invades the inner conscience of the people and tries to force them to believe a certain way.
It fundamentally shifted the concept of who actually owns the country.
Yes, Calvin argued that the law sits entirely above the prince. The prince is not the owner of the people, God is the owner, and the prince is merely a temporary, flawed administrator.
That's a huge demotion for a king.
The best rulers are those who bind themselves to the exact same laws as the common people. This completely stripped away the divine owner status that kings had claimed for centuries.
Okay, so we have this robust 500-year-old intellectual framework designed specifically to identify and stop tyrants using dispersed power and checks and balances. But are those 500-year-old shields still holding up? Because it feels like modern democratic systems are straining under immense pressure right now. Where are they structurally vulnerable today?
That requires us to look at the vulnerabilities of modern systems through a very neutral architectural lens.
Right. And to be clear to you listening, we're neutrally reporting on how different sides view this architecture. We're not endorsing either political side here, just looking at the blueprints.
Exactly. We have to examine how these historical defenses are being stress-tested in real time and where the original blueprints might be flawed.
If we apply this historical lens to modern U.S. politics and strictly looking at the architecture of the systems, you can see both sides wrestling with this exact fear of tyranny, just from completely different angles. Let's start with the American system, which was explicitly designed to stop someone like King George III. They built in the three branches of government to check each other. But thinkers like the late senator and sociologist Daniel Patrick Moynihan warned that the American presidential system has a hidden fatal weakness. What is the flaw in the blueprint, according to him?
The flaw is the combination of a massively powerful executive branch with a two-party winner-takes-all electoral structure.
Okay, how does that break the system?
Moynihan pointed out that if one political party entirely aligns its identity behind a single executive leader, the system breaks down. The Senate and the House stop acting as independent, institutional checks on power and instead become mere legislative extensions of the president's personal will.
Oh, I see. The guardrails disappear if the mechanics of the political party demand absolute loyalty to the leader over loyalty to the Constitution.
Exactly. The system becomes dangerously dependent on the personal character and restraint of the individual occupying the Oval Office. We also see this architectural debate in recent Supreme Court rulings that have expanded executive power, for example, by allowing the president to more easily fire independent federal regulators.
How does that shift in power look depending on your political philosophy?
Well, supporters of this shift frame it as fundamentally democratic. They argue that the president is elected by the people, while federal regulators are unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats. Therefore, giving the president more control is returning power to the voters.
Right, that makes sense from that angle.
But critics view it through the lens of tyranny prevention. They see it as stripping away vital, independent guardrails that prevent the dangerous concentration of executive power.
And the fear of tyranny is highly active on the right in America as well, particularly regarding cultural and institutional policies. When Donald Trump worked to dismantle diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI policies, he specifically used the word tyranny to describe them. How does a corporate or university policy fit into the classical concept of tyranny for its critics?
For many conservative critics, these policies represent a form of elite administrative overreach. They view DEI initiatives as invading private institutions and the inner conscience of individuals, attempting to engineer equality of outcome rather than simply ensuring equality of opportunity.
Okay, so it goes back to that idea of invading the inner conscience.
Yes, in their view, an unelected bureaucratic system dictating social outcomes, enforcing speech codes, and categorizing people by group identity feels like a modern, suffocating form of tyranny overstepping its legal and moral bounds.
It's so interesting. Both sides are hypervigilant about tyranny, but they see the threat coming from entirely different directions. One side fears the concentration of executive power and a rogue leader. The other side fears the invisible tyranny of the administrative state and cultural overreach.
Exactly.
Now, contrast this American architectural stress with the European model, specifically the Dutch polder model. How do they handle the threat of a strongman?
The Dutch system is a multi-party parliamentary democracy, and the contrast is just stark. Because there are sometimes a dozen or more parties represented, no single group ever wins an outright dominant majority.
Oh, wow. A dozen parties.
Yeah. Therefore, to govern, they are forced to form massive coalitions. This requires endless, agonizing, months-long compromises.
That sounds incredibly tedious. How does anything ever get done?
It is tedious, but that friction is the point of the design. The prime minister in this system functions much less like a visionary, all-powerful ruler and much more like a beleaguered HR manager trying to keep 5 different departments relatively happy.
An HR manager, that's hilarious.
While the American system, as John Stuart Mill feared, can theoretically be captured by a tyranny of the majority if one party sweeps the board, the European systems are intentionally designed to make it structurally impossible for a tyrant to emerge. A would-be autocrat simply couldn't endure the sheer volume of boring, bureaucratic meetings required to govern.
Let me bring back the analogy from the start and expand on it. The U.S. system is like a high-performance sports car. It's incredibly powerful, it can turn on a dime and enact massive change, but if the driver is reckless or if the brakes fail, you can easily drive it off a cliff.
Yes.
But the Dutch system is like a bumper car. It's slow, it's annoying, you're constantly bumping into other people and jarring your neck, but the track is physically walled in. You literally cannot go out of bounds. It is structurally impossible to drive a bumper car off a cliff.
That is an excellent visualization of the structural differences. And it brings us to the core thesis of Noah Smith's article, the hidden frailty of tyrants versus the boring strength of democracies.
Right, because if democracies are essentially resilient, shock-absorbing bumper cars, maybe that slow, frustrating resilience is exactly why Smith argues that tyrants are actually losing wars in the modern world.
We've talked about how autocrats build their power, how they manufacture chaos and hijack religion. But let's look at the actual foundation of that power when it is tested. The research brings up a fascinating historical debate among historians regarding the mechanics of totalitarian control. The Hitler versus Honecker debate.
Okay, unpack the numbers on this for us, because I found this staggering.
Erich Honecker was the authoritarian leader of East Germany during the Cold War. Historians often debate which dictatorship was structurally stronger or had more total control over its citizens, Hitler's Third Reich or Honecker's DDR.
Okay.
To answer this, they look at the sheer numbers of the police state. To control a population of roughly 11 million people, Honecker required a massive, suffocating, secret police apparatus, the Stasi. He employed roughly 370,000 informants and agents.
370,000 for just 11 million people.
Yes. Roughly 1 in 20 people was actively spying on their neighbors.
That is a staggering level of paranoia. The state is terrified of its own people. What were the numbers for Hitler then?
Hitler controlled a population of roughly 60 million people in Germany. But the Gestapo, the secret police, only had about 60,000 to 70,000 agents at its peak.
Wait, I'm struggling with the math on that. If he only had 60,000 agents for 60 million people, that makes no sense. How did he actually enforce the laws and root out dissent with a fraction of the police force?
This is the terrifying psychological reality of that regime. Some historians argue this made Hitler's regime stronger in a perverse way because he didn't need a massive, visible police force on every corner.
The people were doing it for him.
The population had internalized the hateful ideology so deeply that they policed themselves. The Gestapo relied overwhelmingly on ordinary citizens, voluntarily denouncing their neighbors, their co-workers, and their family members.
So they basically weaponized the public against each other.
They naturally worked towards the Führer, anticipating his desires and executing his will without needing direct written orders. Honecker, by contrast, needed visible, mechanical repression just to keep the state functioning day to day.
But the ultimate punchline to both of those systems is that they both completely collapsed. Despite the appearance of total control, they were incredibly brittle.
Because autocracies lack deep institutional roots. They are entirely dependent on the center holding. And the fatal structural flaw of the modern strongman is the collapse of the feedback loop.
Right, because they imprison or assassinate anyone who brings them bad news.
Exactly. If you ruthlessly punish honesty, people stop telling you the truth. The leader surrounds themselves exclusively with yes men. They lose all self-correcting feedback loops.
Which brings us back to Putin.
This is precisely why Putin's intelligence apparatus utterly failed him when he invaded Ukraine. He was likely told by his generals that Kiev would fall in 3 days, and that Ukrainians would welcome his tanks with flowers, because that is the only narrative he wanted to hear. The system was incapable of correcting his delusions.
And the human cost of that delusion brings us right back to the statistic we started with today. Historian Peter Frankopan highlights the reality of the autocrats' war in Ukraine right now. A new Russian recruit survives an average of just 10 days to 3 weeks from the time they arrive at training. And once they are in the actual combat zone, their survival time is between 20 and 35 minutes.
It is a meat grinder, fueled by one man's eschatological paranoia. And despite the Russian government offering massive financial payouts, sometimes equivalent to over $100,000 to families, there is zero intrinsic motivation for those soldiers.
Compare that brittle structure to a democracy defending itself. Democracies can mobilize immense, sustainable, intrinsic motivation because the citizens are fighting for their own homes, their own voices, their own elected institutions.
Exactly. Furthermore, in an autocracy, if the leader falls down the stairs tomorrow and dies, the entire system vanishes into chaos. There is no institutional succession plan. There is only a violent power vacuum.
Whereas democracies, because they are built on laws and not men, easily survive the death or departure of their leaders. The boring bureaucracy just keeps churning.
Which brings up a really crucial point about how we view our own systems today. The analysis digs into this modern obsession we have with surveys measuring trust in government. You see the headlines every single week. Trust in government is at an all-time low.
Right, and we all share it, and we all feel demoralized.
The experts we are drawing from are deeply critical of this modern framing. Treating trust as a volatile metric that fluctuates every month treats democracy like a consumer product. It's as if citizens are giving a one-star Yelp review to the government because they didn't like the service this week.
The DMV line was too long, 0 stars for the concept of the republic.
Exactly. Historically, trust was not a consumer metric. Trust was a profound civic virtue. The Latin word is fides. Citizens were expected to actively build trust in their local communities, in their civic groups, in their towns.
So it wasn't just handed to them.
No. And when it came to the federal government, they were never supposed to have blind emotional trust. They were supposed to apply constructive distrust.
Constructive distrust. That completely reframes the relationship. What does that actually look like?
It means acknowledging that leaders are flawed, corruptible humans, just as John Calvin warned, and therefore you actively participate in the institutions that keep those leaders in check. You join unions, you support a free press, you attend local councils, you vote. You do not passively consume government, you actively audit it.
I just had a bit of an epiphany here. When the news constantly screams that trust in government is at an all-time low and we all internalize that pessimism, that is actually playing perfectly into the hands of the tyrant, isn't it?
It really is.
Because the autocrat's entire pitch is to bypass the messy institutions, point to the low trust, and say, see, the system is broken, the bureaucracy is failing you, only I can fix it.
You've hit the absolute core of the issue.
Right.
By obsessing over the trust gap as a fatal failure of the system, we inadvertently validate the autocrat's narrative. We should expect friction in a democracy. We should expect to be annoyed by bureaucracy.
That friction is the sound of checks and balances working.
Yes. That annoyance is the sound of the bumper cars hitting the safety walls.
So to pull all of this together, we've seen how tyrants rise. They don't just appear, they radicalize. They manufacture chaos, they inflate solvable crises into cosmic proportions, and they hijack apocalyptic narratives to trigger our deepest evolutionary survival instincts.
They want us terrified, so we demand a strict father to protect us.
But as the history reviews, their systems are largely a mirage. They project an image of a reinforced concrete bunker, but they lack institutional depth. They lack the self-correcting feedback loops because they live in paranoid echo chambers of their own making.
And they lack the resilient, constructive distrust that makes those boring democracies unexpectedly tough. The analysis uses one final, brilliant biblical image from the book of Daniel to describe this. The tyrant's regime is like a towering statue with a head of pure gold, looking majestic and terrifying, but it stands on feet of clay.
One solid strike to the base and the whole thing shatters. I want to connect this directly back to you listening to this deep dive right now. You might look at your phone, scroll the news, and feel entirely overwhelmed by the constant barrage of crises. It feels exhausting.
It does.
But remember what we unpacked today, that panic is often a manufactured product. It is a tool designed specifically to short-circuit your critical thinking and make you crave a strong man to make the noise stop.
Right.
The fact that you likely live in a society with safe holidays, a generally low burnout rate compared to the brutal historical norms, and where politics is mostly just a series of incredibly boring, tedious meetings, that isn't a weakness. That is the ultimate flex of a healthy, functioning society. The bumper cars are working.
The boredom is the feature, not the bug. It means the system is absorbing the violent shock so you don't have to.
So I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over today. If modern autocrats and strongmen run on the fuel of our panic, our constant attention, and this muscle velocity of nonstop manufactured chaos is the most radical, powerful act of democratic resistance, simply choosing to be bored.
I love that idea.
What if ignoring their manufactured outrage, turning off the hyper-reality of social media, and quietly volunteering at your local library or attending a mundane 2-hour town hall meeting about zoning laws is actually the ultimate kryptonite to tyranny?
It deprives them of the one thing they need most, our fear.
Something to think about the next time someone tries to tell you the sky is falling. Thank you for exploring these incredible sources with us on The Deep Dive.